Next, we have a very interesting topic. It is on 7 behavioral errors in investing. May I request Professor Bakshi to please join us on the dais? And can I request Srinivasan of IFA Galaxy to please do the honors? Before I get started with introducing Mr. Bakshi, just wanted to let you know that I hope you have all downloaded the IFA Galaxy app. How many of you all have downloaded the IFA Galaxy app? Great.
I can see almost all the hands go up.
Yeah, so the proceedings are coming. You can also raise questions on the app because this is a very interesting subject. And I'd like to get started with introducing Professor Bakshi. Sanjay Bakshi is an adjunct professor at Management Development Institute, Gurgaon, where he teaches MBA students a popular course called Behavioral Finance and Business Valuation. He is also the managing partner of Value Quest Capital LLP, a value investing specialist in Indian public markets. And Value Quest advises some of India's largest family offices in making conservative but meaningful long-term public market investments. Over to you, Professor Bakshi. Srini. May we have a round of applause, please?
Very good afternoon to all of you. This is probably the biggest class I've ever had. So I didn't expect such a big crowd, and I hope that after having a lovely lunch that I'm sure you all had, you won't go to sleep by what I'm going to tell you. In fact, when I was invited here, I thought I'll talk about 7 behavioral biases, but I actually cut them down to 6. So the topic is 6 behavioral errors. So I've been a value investor for the last 21 odd years. I also teach the subject of behavioral finance and business valuation. And during the course of teaching and practicing value investing, and during the course of meeting a lot of value investors and normal investors, other kinds of investors, including speculators, I've come to a list of about 6 big biases. These are blunders that people make, including myself. And I wanted to tell you about these 6 behavioral biases and how you can fix them. This is going to be slightly interactive. So I know some of you are so far away from me, but I'm hopeful that you can all hear me and participate in what I have to tell you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a slide on the screen, and I want you to read what you see on the screen and do it loudly and do it quickly. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. One more time. So when I do this in my class, I hear Paris in the spring, once in a lifetime, bird in the hand. We've all heard these words before, but you can easily see we are making a mistake. What's going on? What's going on is that our mind actually has 2 parts. The reflexive and the reflective. The reflexive part of the brain is what just got activated. Jump to conclusions, quick. It's why people get it wrong. The reflective part of the brain is, this is the reflexive part. It's like, being in the jungle. Think of your ancestors. If they heard a sound in the bush, they would just run. They didn't wait to see whether there was genuinely a predator hiding behind the bushes about to attack your ancestor. She or he just ran. And the consequences of making a mistake, in a sense running and then finding that it was not a predator, were very minor. And that's how we got this in us. The reflective part of the brain, system 2, is very different. It is like solving an equation of algebra. In school, we've all done this. It's effortful, reasoned, slow, logical, and less prone to error. So most of these biases are there in us for very good reasons, because evolution gave them to us, because they do something good for us. But in today's fast-moving world, many of these biases end up causing us to make big mistakes, particularly in the financial markets. So I'm going to talk to you about them. The first one is called the availability heuristic, availability trap. This is a term in brackets that you see is a term coined by Daniel Kahneman, the father of behavioral economics, a Nobel laureate. He calls it, what you see is all there is. So what does this mean? So many years ago, I created this example for my class. And example is like this. Since you are financial advisors, maybe you can take a shot at it. Assume that today is 27th March 2009, and there are 5 days left in the financial year. And one of your friends has approached you to give him some advice on his portfolio. He presents you with the following information. He has 5 securities: Toblerone, M&M, See's Candy, Hershey's, and Godiva. You have the cost of the position, you have the market value of the position, you have the unrealized gains or losses, and you're told whether these are long-term or short-term. Assume that the tax rate is the same on long-term and short-term, and that long-term losses can be set off only against long-term gains, and same thing applies to short-term. In addition, your friend has also given you some additional information that he has already realized a short-term loss of 27 lakhs, and now he needs 73 lakh rupees from this portfolio to meet a certain personal need. Which securities should he sell? Now, if you look at the information on the screen, you'll see there is, the way the problem is constructed is that if you were to sell Hershey's and Godiva, you will end up with a loss of 27 lakhs. And you already have a gain of 27 lakhs. So most people say sell Hershey's and sell Godiva, because then you save taxes. But that is not the problem that I've asked my student to solve. The problem I asked him to solve was which are the correct securities to sell, not which are the securities to sell which will produce the minimum tax bill. And what you see over here is that the information that you need to solve the problem has not been supplied. You don't know the prospects of these businesses. I haven't provided you with information about what the future prospects would be like. Maybe Hershey's and Godiva are the stocks that you should be actually buying right now. What I have provided you with some irrelevant information which makes people solve the wrong problem. That's what availability heuristic means, that you solve wrong problems because your mind is confused. Now, why does that happen? What is the general principle at work? The general principle at work is that the human brain tends to drift into working with something that is easily available to it. So the metaphor that I use is forefront of my mind and the back of my mind. So I think you all remember what you had for breakfast today morning, and maybe even yesterday and maybe the day before, but I doubt it if you know what you had for breakfast 16 days ago. And that's how memory structures work. So what you did today, you remember, but you don't know what you did 3 years ago today. The memory fades. The brain can't use what it cannot remember, or it is blocked from recognizing under the influence of certain psychological tendencies. Obviously, if you're going to overweigh things that really don't matter, but are at the forefront of your mind, and underweigh things that don't really matter so much, but are at the back of your mind, you're going to end up with miscognition. Now, what are the kind of things that are more available in people's mind? Well, one of the things is vividity, vividness, something that captures their attention. Think plane crashes, think volcanoes, think earthquakes. People remember those. In fact, in a research that was done many years ago, people wanted to find out what is the reaction of doctors who have done their MBBS, doctors who have been trained over the years to recognize that smoking is very harmful. They've studied dozens of studies. They've looked at all of the peer-reviewed journals. What they found was something astonishing, that all those studies that they did in medical school, they don't have much of an impact. The impact comes from watching chest x-rays. Now, if you are a surgeon or if you're a doctor whose specialty is the chest, you're going to see a lot of chest x-rays. And you will see a lot more cancer patients who have lung cancer. So what they found was astonishing. What they found was that the probability of a physician smoking is directly related to the distance of a specialty from the lungs. It's astonishing because what that means is the doctors who studied in MBBS, they had all these studies, but they didn't make much of an impact. The fact that they are now specializing in knee surgery means they don't get to see a lot of chest x-rays. So they intend to smoke more. Obviously, we have similar examples in the domain of financial markets and the financial products industry. People, when they are told about a possibility of a plane crash, just before they're about to board a plane, the mind starts worrying about the probability of a plane crash. People boarding a flight are prepared to pay more for flight insurance policy to cover against terrorism insurance than for a general policy covering all risks. Think about that. Clever, psychologically astute insurance companies use these tricks. The other thing that affects our brain in terms of availability heuristic, things that bring things to the forefront of our minds, recency. I mentioned this a while back. You remember what you ate today morning. You don't remember what you had 16 days ago. So we watch news. We read newspapers. We see what happened today. News is coming to us in real time. We watch quarterly results. There is this tendency to react and sometimes, not sometimes, I think often, overreact to what's happening right now or what just happened. Purchase of earthquake insurance increases greatly after the occurrence of earthquake. Indeed, if you think about it from an engineering perspective, the probability of an earthquake goes down after a series of earthquakes have already occurred in that region. But people rush to buy more earthquake insurance. The parallel is with financial markets is obvious. People believe that things are not risky exactly when they are getting riskier. When markets are down and things are cheap, that's how value investors look at businesses. For value investors, things are becoming less risky and more interesting. But for most people out there, the world is becoming riskier when the prices are falling. It's exactly the opposite. If you think about it, I mean, if you go to the market, if you want to buy something, you would want things to become cheap. You would think it will be far less risky for you to buy something when it is cheaper than when it is more expensive. But that's not how things play out in financial markets. If you combine recency with vividness, it comes up with quite a lethal combination. So the basic limitation of our mind is that to do with our ability to deal with small risks. We either massively underestimate the impact of small probability, high impact situations, or we kind of overreact crazily. And it all depends on recency and vividness. So people respond to terrorism because that's vivid. People died. It's on television. It's pretty gory. But they don't respond so much to climate change. It's slow and gradual and you don't see it every day. It just escapes your attention. And this is interesting because in financial markets, you see all these bubbles building up. You see volcanoes which haven't erupted for a long time. Now, imagine that you're living in a city which is right next to a dormant volcano which hasn't erupted for the last 50 years. Every day that the volcano has not erupted makes people think it's a safer day. Indeed, it's becoming riskier by the day because of the pressure that is building up. You see the same parallel play out in financial markets. News makes us end up overreacting to terrorism, underreacting to chronic stress. Astronauts are overrated, nurses are underrated. Airplane crashes are overrated, resistance to antibiotics is underrated. So our risk map is completely influenced by the availability heuristic. Indeed, what we experience directly is far more important in our brains than what we experience through other people, which is not the way it should be. I mean, when I show this picture to my class, I tell them, here is a man, he's 99 years old, he smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day. People say, wow, this means that smoking cannot be all that dangerous. I mean, here is a proof, living proof, right? But what is the truth? What is the correct way of thinking about this problem? So you need to back up a bit and do a thought experiment. And it's not difficult. Just imagine that there are 1,000 people who smoke and 1,000 people who don't smoke. And you just monitor how their lives carry on over the years. I think you would agree that the bunch of people who don't smoke will have many, many more 99-year-olds than the bunch of people who do smoke. And you saw the one who smoked. You didn't see many, many more who are still around who did not smoke. And you arrived at the wrong conclusion. There is an interesting story about a stock market prediction newsletter scam. So this guy one day receives a newsletter, one of those subscription-based recommendation services, that you should buy this stock. And the recommendation is that this particular stock will go up by 10% during the course of the next 1 month. 10% in a month is a lot of money. But you think it's just a tip, it's just a recommendation. I don't know whether this fellow has any predictive abilities or not. You ignore it. Next month, another prediction comes. And this time, he says, this stock will go down by more than 10%. And it goes down by more than 10%. You're mildly surprised. It could be a fluke, could be a coincidence. And the next one is correct. And the next one. So you have 6 correct predictions in a row. And you say, wow, this guy really knows something. Every time he tells me what will happen, it happens. But what's really going on? Well, the man started with 364,500 people. He divided them into 3 buckets. Each bucket had a size of 121,500. One of them got a prediction that the stock will go up by 10% or more. One of them had a prediction that it will drop by 10% or more. And one of them had the prediction it will be range bound between -10 and +10. He had no idea which one of these 3 will happen, but he knew that one of them will happen. So he was right for 1/3 of these people and wrong for 2/3. He forgot about the 2/3 about which he was wrong, and then he created his second newsletter and he made the same 3 different predictions and sent them to 1/3 each. And continuing this way, if you do the math, after 6 iterations, you will end up with 500 people who would have received by now 6 correct predictions in a row. And then he sends them a letter saying that my next prediction is available to you at an annual subscription of 5 lakh rupees. Imagine what that does to people, or what that could do to people. Let's move to the second error. Now I know you just had a nice lunch and I'm going to give you some dessert. Imagine you put this in your mouth and you're savoring it and you're enjoying the sweet flavor of the chocolate. And immediately after you put this in your mouth, I ask you to put this in your mouth. What will happen? Your mouth will feel much more bitter than it would if you had not put the chocolate in your mouth initially. What that means is that if you have two different quantities presented to you one after the other, and there's a big difference between those two quantities, then the fact that they were presented to you just one after the other tends to accentuate the difference. It tends to increase the difference between them. My favorite example to explain this is to ask my students to imagine that they've saved money to buy a lamp that they've been wanting to buy for a long time. The lamp costs 10,000 bucks and they decided to buy it. They love the color, they love the model, they're about to pay for it, at which time the store manager tells them that, hey, listen, we have another store which is just 10 minutes away and we are going to close down that store. We have a closing down sale on over there. You can buy the same lamp over there for 9,000 bucks. It's a 10% discount, 1,000 rupee off on a 10,000 rupee lamp. So I asked my students, how many of you would want to walk 10 minutes to save 1,000 bucks on a 10,000 rupee lamp? And almost all of them raised their hands. 10,000 rupees is a lot of money for them. Saving 1,000 bucks on a 10,000 rupee lamp is a big saving for them. They don't mind spending extra 10 minutes to save 1,000 bucks. And then I asked the people who have raised their hands that they will walk 10 minutes to save the 1,000 bucks. I present them with a different problem. I tell them, you're not buying a lamp, you're buying a car. And you've decided to buy this car, you love the model, you've driven it around, you love the color, everything is perfect. The car costs 10 lakh rupees. But just before you're about to pay for the car, you're told by the showroom in charge that, hey, listen, we have another showroom which is just 10 minutes away. We're closing down that showroom and we have the exact same car with the exact same model, color. You can buy it cheaper over there. How much cheaper? You ask. It tells you we'll give it to you for 9,99,000 rupees. It's 1,000 rupees saving on a 10 lakh rupee car. So I asked my students, how many of you will walk 10 minutes to save 1,000 rupees on a 10 lakh rupee car? And almost nobody raises their hand. But if you think about it, the first problem and the second problem are the same problems. The 1,000 rupee saving is the same. It will buy you the same things. It just feels that 1,000 rupees saved on a 10,000 rupee lamp is worth more than 1,000 rupees saved on a 10 lakh rupee car. Both situations involve the same effort, 10 minutes of walk. Both end up making you richer by exactly the same amount. So the correct answer should be that you will give the same answer to both the problems. If you're not willing to walk 10 minutes to save 1,000 bucks on a lamp, you shouldn't do that for the car either. But if you are willing to walk 10 minutes to save 10,000 rupees on a 10,000 rupee lamp, you should make the same effort for the car. People get fooled by percentages. They start thinking about the idea that 1,000 rupees saved on a 10,000 rupee lamp is 10% is a big saving. And I can do a lot with that money, but the 1,000 rupees that you save in either of these two situations will buy you the same things. I mean, when you go out and try to buy something with 1,000 rupees on the lamp, you're not going to get anything more than you would from the money that you saved on the car. Experiments show that by placing items next to each other, you can fool people. For example, as you see in the image in front of you, there is a very expensive bottle of wine, $150, and then there is a couple of bottles of $95, and there are really cheap bottles, $15. Which bottle sells the most? It turns out the $95 wine sells the most. $95 is a lot of money to pay for a bottle of wine. But when you compare it with the $150 bottle, it doesn't look that expensive. So the difference between 150 and 95 becomes accentuated. And of course, the parallels are out there. If you really want to promote a 50 PE stock, compare it with a 95 PE stock in the same industry. It doesn't matter whether the 50 PE stock is going to be grossly overvalued. It just looks cheap compared. The whole thing about relative valuations causes people to ignore the fact that this could actually both will be overvalued. You shouldn't buy either of them. We find similar things happening when people start averaging down. Averaging down is a tool that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It's a good tool, but like any tool, it can be misused. And if you blindly apply it, you may end up losing a lot of money. Indeed, the idea behind averaging down is that you bought something and it fell in price and you bought a little more, so brought down the average cost. It's a very elegant idea. But what if you're wrong? What if you bought into a speculative business which is about to go bust? I mean, think about it in the reverse order. Every stock that is going to go bankrupt will at some point of time hit 52-week low. And people say, oh my God, it's gone to 52-week low. I should buy it. It's dropped 80%, how much more can it fall? I should buy it. But every stock that is going to go bankrupt, coming from a business that is going to go bankrupt, is a stock that will drop 80% and then drop another 100%. It will go to zero. So this whole idea about blindly averaging down is a ludicrous idea. It's like catching a falling knife. The reverse is something that most people don't even think about. So one of my friends, he talks a lot of sense. And he says that most investors sell their winners to buy more of their losers. I'm sure you will be familiar with many of your clients, and maybe some of you in your personal life have made this mistake. I certainly have. So you have to recognize that sometimes it's a good idea to cut off the dead branches and the tree will grow stronger. You have to recognize that blind averaging down is not always a good idea. Then of course, the idea of Ben Franklin that small expenses like a small leak, they can sink a big ship. So let me give you an example. I put this for my class. So I say, well, imagine this is a stock picker. He's a brilliant stock picker. He can double his money every year. And he has this amazing market timing ability. He buys a stock at the beginning of the year, he sells it at the end of the year, and it doubles. And he sells it, he pays taxes, he pays the brokerage, STT, what have you. And then he buys another stock and that also doubles at the end of 1 year. He does it for 30 long years. And we know the power of compounding. So $1 under the assumptions on the screen will become $170 million under those assumptions. But what instead of market timing, you had a buy and hold approach. If you could buy a stock that doubled every year for 30 years, same skill, but fewer decisions. People don't know how much difference is staggering. I think you're all experts in the field. You would know that buy and hold will end up with a higher number than a market timing number. But sometimes the differences surprise even the experts. At the end of 30 years, with the same predictive ability, in a buy and hold approach, you will end up with $954 million instead of just $170 million. The differences are staggering. Those small changes make a huge difference. Those costs, those low brokerages, those frictional costs, and of course the taxes that you had paid every year, they don't work for you in a market timing approach. In a buy and hold, they do. And people like Buffett figured this out long back. Tax-paying investors will realize a far, far greater sum from a single investment that compounds internally at a given rate than from a succession of investments compounding at the same rate. I mean, the reason I mention this here is that small things make big differences over long periods of time. Costs matter. If you really want to serve your clients, you have to give them a low-cost product. And I think India's mutual fund industry is doing that to a very large extent. The other kind of contrast effect is called, I just talked to you about a high contrast effect, when the differences are huge. Then there is the second kind of effect, which is called a low contrast effect, the boiling frog syndrome. Under that effect, if you put a frog in boiling hot water, it will jump out and escape. But if you put a frog in room temperature water and slowly boil it, it will not be able to tell the difference. It will boil and die. There is no truth whatsoever to this story, but the human equivalent of the boiling frog is there in all of us. What that means is small changes, incremental changes, whether improvements or otherwise, they tend to go unnoticed. You're going to miss them because you're too close to the situation. If you keep on looking at daily results, quarterly results, daily information, there will be a lot of noise which will end up in your data set. Charlie Munger, Buffett's partner, once said that cognition misled by tiny changes involving low contrast will often miss a trend that is destiny. What that means is that sometimes some businesses are going to die and you don't know that yet, but it's going to be a slow, painful death. So you see that happen to Kodak when digital cameras came in. You see that happen to landline phones when BlackBerry came in, and now we know what has happened to BlackBerry. We see what happened to the music tape industry. And this is beautiful video that I want to share with you. It talks about the idea of disruption as to what happens to a desktop. What has happened to a desktop over the last few years? Take a look at this. We call it the App Store risk. How businesses are destroyed. We've seen what Uber has done to the taxi industry, what Airbnb is doing to the hotel industry. Any investor has to be cognizant of the App Store risk. There are business models which are coming up which will destroy existing businesses which have been around for more than 100, 200 years. And people think, oh, it's been there for 200 years, nothing can beat it. And the pace of change is only accelerating. So as financial advisors, I think it's your duty to keep abreast of the big changes that are happening in the world of technology. Of course, people don't recognize that. They see hope. They always see, well, this business, Kodak, for example, did not die in a year. It took more than 15 years for Kodak to die. And there were periods during which when Kodak earnings are actually up. It's not a decline in a straight line. But when the things go up, it's similar to what I think you might be familiar with. You call it the dead cat bounce. It's like a cat is dead, but if you drop it on the floor, it will bounce one more time before it drops dead fully. You see that in noise. You see that in data. If you look at daily data or quarterly data or weekly data, you'll see all those noise coming in. So when you see a little bit uptick, you think, well, there is light at the end of the tunnel. We don't recognize that the light is coming from an oncoming train. You're going to see a lot of disruption. The pace of disruption is going to increase. Established businesses today are going to be disrupted by businesses which are completely from different industries. And any equity investor or equity advisor has to be cognizant of the risks that are here. I mean, I'll give you an example. Some time back, I was studying the business of Gillette, which is a beautiful business. Everybody knows about Gillette. Very cheap razors and very expensive razor blades. It's been around for decades, hugely profitable business. And there is this company called Dollar Shave Club that came up in the US, and they started selling for $1 a month, subscription-based model will send you the blades. They already taken 8% market share in a matter of 2 years. 2 years, 8% market share of Gillette gone. Somebody has come up, just got funded with $2 million for developing a laser shaver. It lasts for 50,000 hours. It will cost $30. It doesn't need a blade. And done. No scratches. You don't need aftershave. You don't need razor blades. It's always there for you. 50,000 hours. So the point I'm trying to tell you is that the idea that something has been around for a long time and has been so profitable lulls people into complacency. They think they become too comfortable. They think this will last forever. Third bias is called deprival superreaction. It's a funny term. It's a term coined by Charlie Munger. Basically, it means that if you give a dog a bone, he's going to feel very happy, he's going to wag his tail, but he's not going to feel as happy as he would feel very miserable or angry and become very vicious if you try to snatch the bone from his mouth. He'll have a super reaction because you deprived him of something. Now, this is a very powerful example, and it's a very powerful concept. It's got vast practical implications for us as investors and as investment advisors. When people are asked to choose between an 85% chance of winning $100, which is what you call as a gamble, it's a risky bet, because 85% chance you will win $100 and 15% chance you will get nothing, or you're offered, instead of taking the gamble, take a sure gain of $85, almost everybody says, I will take the sure thing. I am a conservative person, I'll take the sure thing, which is fine. But if you were to change the language and present the same problem in the context of losses, and then say, you have an 85% chance of losing $100, or a sure loss of $85, people don't want to take the sure loss anymore. They become gamblers. Just by changing a few words and keeping the problem identical, you can turn people from being conservative to becoming gamblers. So context matters, framing matters, how choices are presented matters, the language in which the choices are presented matters. These are identical problems. People should not give inconsistent answers, but they do. People become risk-seeking when all their options are bad. When they face losses, they become gamblers. They want to get back in the game, they start becoming more risky, they start betting on derivatives, they start betting on penny stocks. It's your job as advisors to caution your investors not to do that. When directly compared or weighed against each other, losses loom larger than gains. And there is an evolutionary story behind it. I don't have time to explain that, but there is a reason why this got into us. If you look at the chart here, as you can see, this is the only chart I want to present you with. If you have a $100 gain, there's a certain amount of pleasure that you have. But if you have a $100 loss, the amount of displeasure that you have is much more. In most people, it is 2 to 3 times as much. This is what we are seeing here. And think about what that means. As advisors, you are advising investors to invest in maybe fixed income. You're advising them to invest in maybe equity securities. Now, if you advise people to invest in long-term fixed income securities, what is the likely outcome given that we live in an inflationary world? People think that investing in bonds and holding on to those bonds for long-term is actually less risky. But if you think about it, if you think of inflation as a risk, because inflation destroys purchasing power. I mean, if you forego 10 hamburgers today and use the money to buy a security and you hold it for 10 years and after 10 years you sell it at some price, maybe a much higher price, and whatever the money you get after you sell it and you've paid the taxes, it'll buy you only 10 hamburgers or 9 hamburgers, then you haven't really made any money, you actually lost money. It doesn't matter how much money you have in your hand, you actually lost money. I think you all understand that. You understand what inflation does. But we don't fully communicate to investors that if you invest, say, in treasury bonds for the long term, with an inflation which is more than treasury bonds, you are 100% sure of losing money in real terms. Is that better, or taking a chance on well-selected securities in the equity markets or good quality products or mutual funds? Is that better? People don't recognize that. They're so averse to losses, they don't even know what loss means. Inflation is a dead loss. It's a sure loss. So the only way to fight it is to invest in securities which have a chance, which have a hope, which have a reasonable chance of beating that inflation. It's a powerful lesson, but often missed out. I mean, when I meet elderly relatives or friends, they tell me, oh, you're a gambler, you're in equities. And I say, where do you put your money? I put it only in fixed deposits. Well, it's hard to argue with elderly people, but I think you all understand what I'm trying to tell you. Being overly sensitive to loss leads people to opt for a certain gain over one that offers a higher possibility of a larger gain. Daniel Kahneman. Desperate fears after losing a lot of money induces people to take enormous risks with the rest of their money. So there are these losses, and then there are these perceived losses, that there is this opportunity and I'm going to miss it. And people do amazingly dumb things when that happens. Two friends share a cab to go to the airport. Both of them miss their flight. One of them misses it by 30 minutes, one of them by 5 minutes. Which one will face more regret? We all know the answer to that, but both of them should face equal regret. Imagine what happens when you're going through this situation. You know, what do most people do? What they should do? We all know what most people do, including us, right? We accelerate instead of deaccelerating. So something is flipping, some switch is flipping. What is that switch? Just think in slow motion what is really happening. You're approaching a crossing and light is green, is turned yellow on its way to become red. You start thinking, I'll be able to go through. I don't want to miss it. I'll miss this chance. I'll go through. Nothing will happen to me. So you become overconfident, you have deep-level super-reaction, you forget, and in that split second, you end up taking chances. You may lose your life. You may end up killing somebody else. Commitment and consistency. It's a big one. It's probably the most important one, I think. We do amazingly dumb things because we've already done something stupid and we want to not look stupid. So just because we don't want to look foolish, we'll continue with something that doesn't make sense. So smoking is the prime example. People smoke, and even though they know it's hard, it's wrong for them, they should give it up, but they can't. So they experience what we in psychology call cognitive dissonance. So they have this feeling about themselves that they are very reasonable human beings, and at the same time they have to reconcile the fact that they believe that they are reasonable human beings with the fact that they smoke. So how do you reconcile these so-called irreconcilable facts? Well, one way to do that is to give up smoking, which is the logical thing to do, but they don't do that, and maybe they can't do that because it's an addictive drug. So how do you reduce dissonance in that case? Well, you can say the medical evidence is inconclusive. The research is all wrong. It was done in a different country at a different time, to a different gene pool. It doesn't apply to me. Or you can say that there are other smart people who do it all the time, so it can't be all that bad. We call this authority bias. Or it could be the example that I presented earlier, that there is a man who smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day and he lived to the age of 99. Or is needed from a relaxation, and I might have a shorter life, but it will be more enjoyable. One of the fundamental assumptions in economics is man is a rational human being. What we find in social psychology is man is not a rational animal, he's a rationalizing one. We try to find reasons to justify what we've already decided to do. One of the things that we do is fall for what is called as the confirmation trap, confirmation bias. It happens to everybody. It happens to me. I'm trying to cut my weight for the last God knows how many years. Now there are days on which I feel very confident that my weight would have gone down, so I get up in the morning and I step onto the weighing machine and I find that the weight indeed has gone down by half a kilo. I'm very happy about it. But if it has not gone down, it's actually gone up, I get out of the machine and kick it again and get back on the machine, if something's wrong with the machine. When you get confirmatory evidence, you stop searching. You feel happy. But when you get disconfirmatory evidence, you feel pretty unhappy. This guy, the British politician, is very candid about the whole thing. He said, I will look at any additional evidence to confirm to the opinion to which I have already come. What a man truly believes, he prefers to be true. One of the big problems that you will face, I think, what happens to investors or your clients who have already spent a lot of money on something. I mean, there is one thing called justification of effort, that the amount of money, blood, tears, toil, sweat, it's all kind of investment, right? So we have put this investment and then it's not working. And you recognize that there's a mistake. So what do? Well, most people ignore the fact that a mistake has occurred. They try to justify their efforts. So think about this. One of the big things here is the cost. You know, you look at all kinds of analysis, reports for clients, and one of the column is cost. Why is it there? It shouldn't be there. Some costs are irrelevant, except when you think about taxes. So for the moment, don't think about taxes. Why is the cost there? People think, oh, I bought it for $100, now it's down to $50. I know I made a mistake. And you as a very conservative, reasonable advisor tell the client that there's another opportunity, it will cost you $50, it's worth $150, buy that, sell this, buy that. Sell the $100 original cost idea for $50, take a loss, use the money and switch into a better opportunity. The client says, I can't do it. He says, I can't do it because if I sell it, I'll have a loss. It's your job to tell him that the loss happened the day you bought it. By selling it today, you're only converting an economic loss into an accounting loss. And it's going to happen to every one of you. And this is very difficult because what that means is that momentarily, occasionally, once in a while, you should start with a clean slate. A portfolio should be viewed not as if it has securities, but has equivalent cash. And then you ask yourself those tough questions that if I was to create this portfolio today, would it look anything close to what it looks right now? And sometimes the answer is overwhelmingly no. Then of course you have to answer the uncomfortable question, why is it so different? Why are you holding on to this? Just because it's down? There are other opportunities. You see, making mistakes is fine. Investing is a probabilistic activity. Everybody's going to make mistakes. What is not right is perpetuating mistakes. That's an inexcusable sin. And one thing which happens is this funny metaphor about a three-legged stool, is that people invent new reasons even though the original reasons are not there. So this stool has got 3 legs. Imagine 3 different reasons why you're doing something. And it turns out that one of the reasons goes away. Well, this is a magical stool in our mind. It creates a new leg. The stool remains stable. People create new reasons to perpetuate their mistakes. So this is a big problem. Why did you buy this thing? What are the reasons why you bought it? Are they still valid? If they are not valid, why are you holding on to them? The idea of changing minds is a very powerful idea in economics and psychology. It's very hard to do. There are ways to do it, of course. No time to talk about that in detail, but essentially, I will leave you with one major useful recommendation. It comes from John Maynard Keynes. When facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? Most people change the facts. Social proof. It means essentially in Hindi, I don't know how many of you know Hindi, but it means bhed chal in Hindi. So here's an experiment which explains that. So which line on the right is equal to, which of the three lines on the right is equal to the line on the left? Well, I think the answer is obvious to anybody with normal vision. But look what happens in an experiment.
The Ash experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you...
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1. 1.
2. 1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3. 3.
The Ash experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat, so we will go along with the group, even...
So you see what happens here. We all know about the power of being a contrarian, of not going along with the crowds. It's important if you're an equity investor. If you want to have a better performance than the crowd, you must do things differently. You pay a very high price in the stock market for a cheery consensus. And there are all these bubbles that you see out there, which are created by euphoria. If you participate in that or your clients participate in that, the outcome is not going to be good. By 6, dopamine. This is about a chemical in the brain. It makes us happy. During euphoric times, when bubble markets are being formed, people go crazy. They'll believe anything. And I think you're familiar with that. They don't read the prospectuses. They don't read IPO documents. They don't read risk factors. And there are strong parallels to be learned from here. This is the document.
Some say the internet is so revolutionary that the usual rules for valuing a stock, such as revenues and earnings, no longer apply.
Over and over again, scenes like this one would play out at the dot-coms. On the day their company's stock went public, employees would watch the value of their stock options soar, making paper millionaires out of many of them. Between 1990 and mid-2000, more than 4,700 new companies debuted on America.
So this company, E-Loan, had no fundamental value, it had no earnings, it had only potential, and it got valued at $2 billion on first day of its IPO. People are going crazy, you know, think about what is happening to the people who own shares in this company or were employees of this company and had stock options. They're experiencing a dopamine rush. What that does to people is that it makes them credulous. This is the world inhabited not by people who want to be persuaded to believe, but by people who want an excuse to believe. As an investment advisor, it is your duty, I would argue, to caution investors. You see, it's easy to get a client and try to make money from him or her, and the client goes away because they lose money. But if you were to become a trusted advisor, which is what you're trying to do, really speaking, you need to think in favor of the client and caution the client and sometimes do things that is not in your own interests. There's no difference between a man who's high, who just made a killing in the stock market, and a man who's high on cocaine. We know this from medical experiments. You put people who are high on cocaine and who just won a big amount of money in the lottery, and the doctors cannot tell the difference. So it's a very fascinating journey for me to mix economics with psychology. It's not easy to be rational. It's not easy to advise investors when your clients are coming and saying, I want to buy this thing, I want to buy this thing because everybody is buying this thing. And maybe the right advice for the client is be cautious. It's not easy, of course, because self-interest comes in and there are commissions and there are management fees to be earned and so on and so forth. But I think if in any profession, in the end, if you think first in favor of the client, in the end, it will turn out to be for your own interest. So this whole thing about the clashing of interests is a very powerful issue that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bakshi. That was very, very enlightening. Almost like having Daniel Kahneman standing and talking to us. Thank you so much. And I believe this session will have questions. Do we? Yeah. Shankar.
Good evening, Professor Bakshi. This is Shankar. The question I want to ask you is, what do you see as disruption coming in financial services?
Disruption in financial services will come from low-cost providers of... look at what is happening in the payment industry. It's very difficult for a credit card company to compete with something like Paytm. If Paytm gets scale, it's going to be very hard for that to happen, right? So when you talk about financial services industry, I think we are moving towards low cost. We've already seen that in the US. So this industry to which we belong should recognize that we're going to see lower margins. The value proposition to the client is going to come from a low cost and a reasonable return. And business models which are based on very high cost structures are going to be under threat. And that's just universal. It's not just a cost in financial services industry. I think applies to all industries.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, Professor. It was really enlightening. My name is Vasudevan. See, often we are told that we need to profile our customers and find out what is the risk appetite. Okay, while we do that, but what I've come across in the process of advising people is the risk appetite per se is not static and it changes over a period. Here is a customer who comes to me says, I don't want equity. And the same person, comes back, as you correctly pointed out after some time, why don't we go into equity fully? So how do we have a standardized, or should we continuously keep doing the risk profiling? Could you please throw some light on that? Thank you.
It's an interesting question, and I've seen some of the question papers that are, in the exam books of people, of regulators like SEBI or NSE mandated exams. I think the idea that you can standardize risk measurement across different kinds of clients, it's an elegant idea. People want to make things simple by reducing it to a formula, but I don't think it's possible to do that. There will always be personal situations which will change the risk profile of a customer. And I completely agree with you that the risk profile today is not going to be the risk profile after 10 or 20 years, or maybe even tomorrow. And therefore, you need to be having a close, you see, the whole idea about this industry is, so the way I think about it is this industry more like an account number, or is like a trusted advisor? So my own experience is more from the trusted advisor aspect. That you know the client extremely well. You know him for a long, long time. So you know the situation, and therefore, instead of him coming to you and telling you about the situation that he's going through, you already know about it. And it is your job to advise him to do the right thing. Of course, it's not possible to do that in a situation when you have millions of customers who are not really people who you know personally but are account numbers. So I don't have a good answer to the account number aspect. I have an answer to what I do for individual clients who I know very well for a long time.
Thank you, sir. We're running right out of time. I'm sure you're available over tea, and we can have an interaction with Professor Bakshi around that. Can I request Ganesh Ramurthy to please hand over a memento to Professor Bakshi? Gentlemen, a big round of applause.